Today we're going from 0 to 100 in SampleVerse, part 2. Hi, I'm Matthew Presley here, back with episode 7 of Stagelight 0 to 100. Today we're going to cover the second half of SampleVerse. If you didn't watch episode 6 covering the first half, click on the link below and check it out. We're starting back up in the edit view, where we're going to be covering how to manipulate oscillators, sample banks, LFOs, and more. I'm going to jump right in. Oscillators. Same thing on the edit panel here. You've got a power button to turn them off. You've got a gain and a fine tune for quick controls. If you have an iOS unlock, you can hit the down arrow button and you can dive right in. Looking at the master section right now, and as you can see here, I've got kind of copies of my gain, tune, and fine tune. Oh, let me turn that arpeggiator off while we play with that. There we go. So fine tuning will tune up and down by a semitone. Detune will go up and down by an octave. You can also change the octaves up or down. And we have a velocity. Right now it's set to ramp, meaning if you're playing hard or soft, it'll change the volume of the oscillator. If you turn that off, it's always going to play at full volume. Now let's look at the waveform options. You can see I've got a little saw wave here. If I want to edit that saw wave, I touch the saw wave tab at the top, and now I get all my editing tools for this specific waveform. If I don't like saw wave, I can change it to a sine, a square, a triangle, or an inverted saw. I can adjust the gain of that wave. I can shift the phase of it. I can shift the octave of that wave, or do things like change the length and grid size. Now you may be wondering, what would you do with changing the grid size of it? All the waveforms inside SampleVerse are fully warpable. So I set a grid to 16ths. Maybe I don't want this saw wave to be perfect. I can draw on the wave and reshape it to make a really unique tone. Something really nasty, something really cool, smooth, you name it. You can draw all like so. Now, in addition to one wave, all of the oscillator modules can have multiple waves. So maybe I want to blend this saw with a square wave. Great. I've got a square wave. It looks really low. Let's hear what it sounds like. Maybe let's shift it up by an octave. And each wave, once again, you can adjust the gain, the phase of it, the length, and the grid size. So you can warp a square wave as well. I can make it kind of do something like this. This is really designed for experimentation, so you can really make your own synth sounds. You can blend multiple waves together and combine them to make something really unique. In addition to adding waves and creating this unique oscillator, you also have an envelope. And that just affects this oscillator. You have attack, hold, decay, sustain, and release, and you also have a quantize. So instead of just dealing with attack in milliseconds, you can actually make something ramp up in, a quarter note. Like so. Same thing with the mod envelope. A mod envelope is for modulating something. I'm going to set this to a quarter note here, and then I'm going to jump over to the filter. The filter has a power button. You simply turn it on, and you can adjust the high and low cut. You have key tracking, which will adjust it based on where you're playing octave-wise on the keyboard. Let's turn that off and let's just take a look at the controls. I've got input gain, I've got low cut, low resonance, high cut, high resonance, and one of my favorite features of our filter in SampleVerse is our drive. You can really add some character, add some noise. Now, going back to the mod envelope. The mod envelope is meant to modulate things. Like in this case, I want the mod envelope to modulate my filter sweep. Quick tip in SampleVerse. Any of the knobs that you see that have this little dot below it that are meant to be assigned or modulated by something. I'm going to touch it here, and I'm going to assign this filter offset to the mod envelope. I'm going to go ahead and turn this down a little bit, and let's try it out. As you can see, the mod envelope, the attack, is set to quarter note. Let's make it go longer. Let's make it go a bar. Now you can hear this oscillator fading into the background in, volume and frequency. Those are just some of the capabilities you have with just an individual oscillator inside SampleVerse. And now remember, each preset you can have up to 3 oscillators and 3 sample banks. Let's move on to sample banks. Before I do that, I want to focus specifically on samples, so I'm going to go ahead and turn down these oscillators here. Now we're just listening to that acoustic guitar. As you can see on the front panel, sample bank has the same features as oscillator. You've got a quick gain and fine tune controls. Hitting the down arrow button, you get our main editing features. So for editing a sample bank, you can only have one set of sounds loaded. You can see the waveforms here. You can adjust things by octaves. You can detune by semitones or by octaves. The same button for, ramping the velocity or having it play full. And you also have the name of the sample bank. So here I can see I've got that acoustic guitar I've loaded. If I wanted to swap it out for something else, I just tap it here and I've got a whole list of sample banks to choose from. This will also show you any sample banks that you've recorded on your own. Now sticking with that, you can go a little bit deeper. We have an extra sub panel down here. If I hit this arrow here, I'm going to get my advanced wave editing options, where similar to on the sample screen, you can get a list of your sounds, audition button, but you can do a few more things, like you can change the root note of where the sample starts. You can enable and disable auto pitch. You can make loop points. Let's go ahead and just make a loop point here. So I've got a loop point on this sample now. Let's go ahead and enable one on here. Looks pretty good. You'll notice in this view you actually have a zoomed in view of your loop point. This you can adjust with these loop start and loop end points. And you can do that to minimize any pops or clicks and make it sound as smooth as possible. We also have an option to turn on or turn off fading and length. Let's go ahead and turn looping on all of these real quick. Let's adjust some points so it looks good. And let's hear it. Once again, you can also go up here and adjust the loop points to about where you think they should be. That's sustaining nicely. That's a long one. Let's shorten that one up. And we can take a look at it down here to make sure. The point of this view here is to make sure there's no zero offset. And as you can see, the end of my loop and the start of my loop are matching up pretty much perfectly. So the loop should sound good, but if it doesn't, you have the control to do that right here. Let me back out of that and let's go to the other tabs here. Besides the sample bank tab, you have an amp envelope tab, which works the exact same way it does in our oscillators. Same thing with the mod envelope and same thing with our filter. You can apply a filter to any oscillator or sample bank separately. You can have them modulate off the mod envelope or maybe off of a MIDI controller. We'll get more into that in a bit. And speaking of modulation, let's get into the LFOs, because that allows you to modulate all kinds of things. Every preset's going to have pretty much one LFO by default, and as you can see on the main panel, you've got things like gain and speed, and if you own the iOS unlock, you get access to do all kinds of cool stuff and make your own. You'll see in the advanced view, it looks very similar to our oscillators. You've got a master view, which gives you your gain and speed, quantized settings. You can set up a different trigger for an LFO, like in this case, it's set up for the sequencer. The LFO only runs if playback is engaged. You can change that to node on. I hit a note and it runs. Or arpeggiator note on. Or just the first node on, which means, if I have node on, every note I play, it's going to start the LFO pattern over again. If I do first note on, it'll play just based on that first note and repeat as long as I'm holding that down. Now you may say, hey, that looks cool, but I'm not hearing anything. We're going to get there. Select the triangle view at the top, and this is where you can change the waveform of the LFO. You've got the basic ones that you have, as I mentioned, in the oscillators. You can adjust the phase, the period, the length, the grid size. You can also modulate them so they're doing, you know, some kind of funky stuff. And you can add multiple ones. I'm just going to go ahead and just drop in, you know, one of everything here, or two of everything here. Like oscillators, LFOs can have up to 5 waveforms. Each waveform can have different settings, different lengths, different patterns, different warping options, you name it. All of these are summed together to make a unique waveform. Now, if you want to hear what that's doing to the sound, you have to assign it to something. Let's assign it to the gain of oscillator 2. I want to play this real quick. Let's turn up the gain of oscillator 2. We'll blend it in with the acoustic guitar. Now I'm going to go into oscillator 2. And I'm going to go to gain. As I mentioned before, any knob you see a little asterisk dot under, you can assign it to something. One of the sources here is LFO 1. Let's assign it to that. And hit play. It's got a beat sync and play that pattern on top of it. If I set this to a sequencer, it'll follow the sequencer. I'm going to edit it from there. I can go ahead and speed it up. If it's too extreme, I can turn the gain down. And you'll kind of hear the effect. Less gain means less effect, less modulation. More gain means more. Now we're finishing things off here. The last sound sculpting tool inside our edit view is our master section. Let's get into that and we'll show you how to save your own presets. The master section is pretty simple. In the advanced section, you've got 3 tabs. You've got the master tab, which gives you things like gain, pan, oversampling. This is a little bit geeky, but if you want things to sound a little bit smoother and you've got the horsepower, set it up to 2x or 4x and things just sound better. You've also got some playability things like a portamento. If I turn portamento on, it'll bend the note. You hold one note down, hit another, it'll bend to it. You can adjust the time. One unique thing about the time is you can do it in milliseconds like a standard synth, or you can do it to the sequencer. It'll always be a 64th note between here, here, or octaves above. Pretty cool. Play around with that. I'll turn that off for now. You've got a simple graph here. Also accesses your filter. Let me hit that tab now. Same thing. This is the same filter on the oscillators and the sample bank, but all of the oscillators and the sample bank run through this. So let's say, you know, I've got, I want to turn saturate on. And I want to turn up drive. Everything's running through this. Maybe I want to assign drive to the mod wheel of my keyboard or expression pedal. Or I want to assign it to something like timbre. I can assign drive to timbre. And as I go up and down, I have timbre assigned to high cut and the drive right now. So this gives you a really cool, expressive way to play with sounds. One thing I haven't showed you yet, I've showed you how to assign things. Let me quickly show you how to unassign things. Maybe I don't want timbre on drive. When you hit the button to bring up the assign menu, you're going to get a green dot next to anything you have assigned. If you tap on that, you get some controls for your assignment. You can temporarily disable it. You can adjust the amount. You can shift it, making it harder or softer based on, you know, your playing. You can invert it, or you can hit the trash can button to remove the assignment. And now, the only thing that's assigned to this is high cut and high resonance. Last but not least, in the master section, you have a reverb. And once again, it's in the master section. That means all of your oscillators, all of your sample banks run through it. You've got your basic reverb controls, power, Input, gain, size, damping, width, and mix. Mix is another thing you can assign. Maybe you're building a really cool lush string pattern. When you slide up on the keys, you want the reverb mix to get louder. You can do cool things like that. Bottom line is you have a ton of sound sculpting capabilities inside SampleVerse, and they're all right here. Let's make a quick blend of my acoustic, Oscillator 2, and Oscillator 1. Once you've got a sound you like and you want to save it, just simply hit the plugin button here, hit Save Preset, and give it a name. And now I've just added my own SampleVerse preset to my library. That wraps it up for this week's episode on SampleVerse. If you've made it this far, congratulations. I know that was a long one and we covered a ton of stuff. I hope it was informative. If it was, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be back next week with another episode. We'll see you next time. Later.